be in the limelight.
Last Commissioner Dewey Seat has to stand and sing the national anthem.
In tune.
We'd like to welcome everybody to our board meeting today, and we'll go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Roll call. Commissioner Talcott. Present. Commissioner Swenson. Present. Commissioner Petrowitz. Here. Commissioner Tropila. Present. Commissioner Humble. Here. Commissioner Robinson. Here. Commissioner Moran's here. We'll go to the consent agenda. Consent agenda is made up of routine day-to-day items that require board action but do not appear to have significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion vote by any board member. We have approval of board minutes from February 28th, 2012. We have payroll checks totaling $59,877.24. We have maintenance and operations checks totaling $534,010.36. We have a request to approve passenger facility charge for $65,000, and we have the financial reports for February, which were previously distributed. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
Is there a second? Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, consent agenda is approved. Director Faulkner, your report regarding capital funding.
Yes, as I mentioned last month, in conjunction with our operating budget, we're going to redo the capital funding plan. Sharon and I have just started, along with the rest of the management staff, working on the operating budget. So we don't have the capital budget ready yet. We've just started circulating a first draft to the FAA to talk to them about the next couple years' funding. So we're hoping to bring that to the board probably more along the May meeting timeline with an update to the capital plan for future years. This year, as you know, we have the terminal project which uses all of our federal dollars for our AIP funds, and then we have the noise program which we've approved in previous meetings. So the next round of capital projects we'll be looking at would be the 2013 program, and like I said, we'll be updating that in conjunction with our operating budget. So we don't have anything on that one this month, but I do have some other things on the director's report. The first thing I just wanted to bring your attention to is I'll pass around these guidance memos from the FAA. A couple more down that way. The FAA had put out new guidance about a little over almost 2 years ago now, I guess, regarding air carrier incentive programs, and I wanted to give you a copy of this now that we do have an active air carrier incentive out there in the market. These are the guidelines we're bound by. Notice my seat's really low here. There we go. All right. And so I just wanted to assure the board that we've set up our incentive program in compliance with the FAA's guidance on this. If you recall, we've got a $55,000 marketing guidance or marketing commitment. The airport is actually spending those funds directly. That money is not being spent by Frontier. Most of those ads have been placed, and the program consists mainly of alerts about low airfares to Great Falls. There is in a couple of the ads mention of Frontier and even prominent mention of Frontier, but the overriding message is a message of marketing Great Falls as a destination in a number of inbound markets, including Denver, Dallas, Kansas City, Minneapolis, and Chicago. In addition to that, we have a campaign that's running in Canada right now to send folks down to Great Falls, and the tagline there is Migrate South, Save Money, and there's a Canadian goose on there with a suitcase that has a Frontier bumper sticker on it. and we're sending them to our website. So if you read through the FAA's guidance on this, the main guidance they give is that our program has to directly support the airport and travel through the airport, which our program does. The second part of the incentive that we have is construction dollars. The majority of those dollars will be spent to run a new fiber line down to the United Gate. That's something that we can use for any airline at any time once it's run. And the second piece of that is a modification to the check-in counter at the Allegiant flight counter. If you've ever been down there, they have two positions when you walk up to the counter in a swinging gate, and then one area there that's not big enough for a position. And what we're going to do down there is take out the swinging gate and replace that with a new counter. If you're standing behind the counter, immediately to your left is a brick wall with a door in it, so they don't need the swinging gate. The gate agents, if they need to get to the passengers, usually step over the scale anyway. But if they don't want to step over the scale, there's a door right there. So we're going to take out the swinging gate and put in a full ticket counter position. And the tangential benefit there is Allegiant will be able to staff now 3 full positions at their counter when they're not doing Frontier flights. Frontier wanted 3 positions for their flights too because they have a larger airplane. So all of our dollars that will be spent on the construction side have tangential benefit to the airport in future years. And then the last piece of our incentive package is just the chambers piece. And we've worked directly with them and to make sure our involvement in that meets the FAA's guidance. So I just wanted to give the board a copy of this since we now do have an active fish on the line for an incentive program. This is the guidance that we're under. You may recall last fall we changed around our incentive program, and a lot of those changes were in direct relationship to this guidance that came out. The other thing I'd point out in this guidance that pertains to us as we got looking through it in a little more detail is if you look at page 3, one of the things that the FAA says in this guidance is that any activities, materials, or expenses for general economic development not related to the airport is not anything we can use airport revenue for. This is something the FAA has been increasingly adamant about. The airport is not to give economic development dollars out in the community. It's just something we need to be aware of. We are allowed to work with EDC or the chamber, but we're supposed to justify and demonstrate that those dollars have been directly contributed in services back to the airport. And I'll pass around too, this is a page from the actual guidance referenced there. The FAA modified this guidance in 2009. So this is the actual policy guidance that I'll pass around. This is the same guidance when we talk to the city about street assessments. We reference the same guidance. This is the FAA's revenue policy. Appendix E talks about what airport revenues can and can't be used for. Among the many things that they can't be used for are, in number 3 here you'll see, use of airport revenues for general economic development in an area. So we can't use our dollars to promote general economic development in the community. We're not even allowed to market the community as a tourism destination directly unless it's specific to the airport. We can't pay any payments in lieu of taxes or any fees or any other payments to a governmental body that we can't demonstrate a direct relationship back in terms of services received by us. So this is, I just want to make the board aware of this as part of the director's report. You know, this is another guidance that we're under, and the FAA has increasingly begun referencing this as something that they want to look for. And you know, in years past we've given GFDA about $5,000 a year. That's something as we get into this budget cycle we probably need to talk about, you know, that contribution and you know how it complies with the policy and that type of thing. Just something to be aware of, but we did want to provide the board this policy statement since we now do have an active incentive out there so that everyone's comfortable with what we've got going with Frontier and that we're in compliance with FAA policy on it.
Any questions? All right.
The other thing I was going to point out, we've got a board over here in the corner. This was in the St. Pat parade. We are seeing a fairly sizable movement in our pricing. on a number of markets. This is just one of a few examples. There's probably another 5 or 6 cities that we didn't have room to fit on the board, where we're seeing ticket prices of $330 round trip. Just some examples of the type of savings we're seeing, and I know Minneapolis is one. Right now the tickets are about $330. That's a market that routinely has been $700 to $800 round trip out of here. Denver's another where we oftentimes see a $600 fare on that one. Atlanta's one that's routinely a $700 fare out of Great Falls, and Dallas is another one we hear a lot of complaints about. Chicago, again, $750 to $800 ticket quite often. So now we're seeing these daily prices on these routes. So we are seeing 50% savings in some cases, even more than that, on a number of these routes. Just wanted to kind of give the board an update on some of the pricing we're seeing out there. As you may know, on our website, we've got an airfare watchdog, and it goes out and queries all the ticket databases from the different airlines and puts up what it considers discount fares. And so that's one way people can kind of monitor. And you can actually sign up for specific markets if you like through that watchdog. If you're planning a trip to Indianapolis, you can sign up to get email alerts when there's good deals that come along on Indy. I actually saw Indy now, occasionally you'll see it at $260 round trip. So some great examples of savings. Just wanted to kind of make the board aware of, we are seeing ticket prices dropping. We're seeing ticket prices dropping even on the pre-existing carriers. For instance, that Minneapolis route, I mentioned that's oftentimes a $700 to $800 fare, and now I've seen Delta tickets for about $410, $412, pretty routinely. One of the tricks we're seeing and we're telling people is, if you can, fly out on Monday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. Even if you don't want to fly Frontier, the pricing is much better on those days with Frontier in the market those days. So that's the best time to fly if you can arrange your departure and your arrival around those days. But some great fares. We're real excited about them coming in here in about 45 days. I think it's going to be a real exciting summer.
I just might mention too, congruent to this, I think remind the board when we first started on this journey, I think our hope was to see about a 20% reduction in fares. We won't know how long this is going to hold up over time, but initially I think it's exceeded our expectations on the savings, so I think that's all positive.
I think that's right. I think it's fair to say these are promotional prices. They may come up a little bit over the summer as Frontier gets into the market and fills up their planes, but I think it's $450 round trip to many of these destinations is probably what you would see in most markets around, as an average fare. That's a more reasonable average fare. Now we're well below that, and I think we're driving towards that as an average fare. And so I think, if we can get Frontier back full time and begin to see the full time effect of these prices, I think it will be in a much more typical fare environment for an airport, a Western airport. So I think it's certainly heading in the right direction and addressing what I heard is the biggest complaint over the last couple of years since I've been here, which is pricing. So it's exciting to see the progress being made there.
John, and I think it has had its effect now, because I just got some tickets yesterday to Phoenix for April before this even starts, and they were much cheaper. I got them United, and I think United's went way down, and they weren't quite as cheap as Delta's, but it was $300, $301, but they had a round trip, but it was a better price. They had a better schedule, is why I did them instead of for what I was having to do. But that was a lot more expensive before. But I think what happened is they want to.
That's right.
They want to own the Denver, the deal with Denver. So when they reduce theirs, then Delta reduced theirs going into Phoenix too. So.
And that's in keeping with what we studied last year in Sioux Falls, which was the flights for Frontier's flights started in July, and the pricing started dropping precipitously in April. Because they don't want anybody to book on the new airline. They want to try to stifle that right from the get-go. And, I think that's fairly typical. And I've noticed the same thing. For instance, our watchdog right now has a $260 round-trip fare in April on United to Atlanta. And that's just, a really, really good deal if you've ever tried to book to Atlanta from here. So, we are seeing the price drop in all the carriers early. And when you look at February, we were up 20% year over year. Last February was a record February. We were up 20%, and the load factors across the board are astoundingly high, well into the mid-80s, well above national average. So as these prices are coming down, we are seeing the stimulus effect we expected, as the passengers take advantage of those low fares. So hopefully that'll continue right through summer.
How do these compare to other Montana markets?
I'd say we're probably on par with, we're probably a little bit below right now Billings and Bozeman, just because we got some preliminary fares, but if you, or some introductory fares. But if you look at their market, Denver is typically a $300, $350 round trip ticket from Billings and Bozeman. Certainly we have a cost advantage right now from Missoula or Kalispell, and Helena too. But, Billings and Bozeman, I'd say, are not that far behind. I'd say most of these markets are probably about a $450 ticket during off-peak times. They could, even on Frontier, might gravitate up to $550 during busy summer months because they get more summer tourism than we would typically get. So right now, I think we're well below, but I don't think we're that far off. It's not a huge savings you would get, but probably 10%, 15% below Billings and Bozeman right now. So a really good position to be in as we come into summer. And the last thing I was going to mention in the director's report is, as my staff has passed, the next 60 days are really a crunch time for us. It's going to be a big couple of months as we have a number of projects coming about. Frontier's counter and communications will be doing the construction in the terminal to enable them to take over their counter here in about 45 days. We've got the parking lot expansion, which we'll talk a little bit on the agenda about. The employee spots that we put in last month have been completely absorbed. In fact, that's probably the densest part of the entire parking lot right now, as those stalls are completely full. It has opened up some in the back row now since we've got those new 40, 45 stalls open. There's a few more spots in the back. But during times of day when, for instance, when Allegiant comes in, when the passengers that are getting off the plane haven't got in their car yet, the people that are getting on the plane are already here, we're still getting down to, I'd say, within our last 2 dozen, 3 dozen stalls. So the parking lot remains very busy. We also have the terminal construction, which we anticipate will start around June. And just today we were conversing with the city permitting department to get the plan review done. That project will begin on April 10th. Obviously, we'll have a pre-bid meeting before that time, and then meetings subsequent to receiving the bids too before we start construction. A lot of decisions to be made yet on the terminal as we look to that project getting started. We're starting our stormwater project right after Easter. We'll be doing some grading down at the south end of the runway 321 there to get rid of that ponding effect we've had since the regrading of the runway a few years back. So that project will be starting pretty quick. That was a 2011 grant that's been held over, fiscal year 2011 grant. It was held over last year because we got it, I think, a day or two before accounting closed, which was well into frost conditions. We've also got our marketing for 2013. We're getting ready to start the conversations with the airlines about air service for next year. Obviously, we'll have an ongoing conversation with Frontier about flights for next year, as well as 2 or 3 other routes that we see on the horizon we think are real possible and exciting for our market. That season really will kick off in April as I go down and meet with a couple of our airlines and start off the marketing season for next year. And then lastly, we'll have a fairly, hopefully, exciting conversation with the FAA here in the next 3 weeks as they line up their funding for the current construction season, 2012 construction, and we find out what we'll have for the terminal building. I'll see the FAA in about 2 weeks over in Seattle at they have an annual regional conference with the regional administrator over there in Seattle where our FAA reports to, and that should be the time when we find out what's available for our project this year. So a lot going on over the next 60 days, exciting stuff, I think, on all fronts, and that this is not to mention the couple of real estate deals that we're working on too that we think have the potential to wrap up here in the next 60 days. So a lot going on, exciting things, and a really busy group right now.
Great. Is there any questions for the director? All right. We have a fairly short agenda here, as you can see. We have 2 action items. I'd just like to remind the board if there's any conflict of interest on any of these items, make it known, and obviously we would want you to abstain or from the discussion and the vote. So, any conflict of interest here today? Okay. First item is the private hangar contract. Laura?
This is the contract we brought to last work session in February, and some issues were raised at that time about the development down the GA area, I guess just development in general. And the two main things that came up is that I took from it were to make sure that they were squared lots and that there was a parking plan, and those are probably the issues that we have down there that we will need to deal with going forward. In the work session, we do have some development guidelines that we'll start discussing as well today. But this gentleman has already taken a hit on his steel prices for his hangar increasing. So he wanted to get this moving forward as quickly as he could so he could sign for his hangar to be able to move forward. So what we've done is we've included, it's the same lease basically that everybody else has, except for we have made that change moving forward. This is a squared lot. It's 110 by 65. He has a 50 by 60 hangar situated on the pad. He has submitted the appropriate documents for what he's planning on putting on the pad, and they're in compliance, and also a parking plan for what he will do. So he's covered those issues that we had. It does increase his rent, I think it's about $200 extra, $218 extra a year to cover that difference. So we would like to approve this so that he can go ahead and sign what he needs to sign and move forward, and then we'll continue the development conversation.
So you're asking for a motion for approval of the plan and the lease?
Yes.
I have a question on the appropriate parking plan. I know that the GA committee did meet and they talked about parking. When you talk about an appropriate plan, what is his plan, or is it going to?
One thing that you have with, we have there's older hangars that go down this direction. They don't have as far from their hangar, the outside of their hangar, to the taxi lane. And the TOFA line is further back. They hardly have room to park on their ramp, on their apron.
Park a car.
Yeah, and to be safe.
And stay on the object-free area.
Right. On this side, which is where this one is, this is the last hangar spot we have. They're actually set 60 feet back. And so they have room to park on their ramp and not be across that line. His plan is actually to pull right into his hangar and park in there, which he doesn't have a problem with. It's 60 deep, and he says he has plenty of room to pull it in there and do that. But he actually could park it on the outside as well and not be obstructing or creating anything that's dangerous there. So down here, there also is not room in between these. They're closer. These ones going down this side have quite a space in between
Easily
them.
30, 40 feet, I would think.
Right. So.
Okay. Any other questions before we have a motion?
Because we don't have a formal policy yet on parking, are we requiring something of him that is above and beyond what we have required of the other hangar owners?
Well, I think
Are we asking more of him to allow him this lease?
I think we are. I mean, we've asked, for one thing, he's got to square his lot off, and eliminate those uneconomic remainders, which isn't a lot of space for him, but it is a little bit more. But then in addition to that, he's just simply got to demonstrate how he can park cars, and then that's going to be an understanding between us that, cars, that's where the cars are going to be parked. There's not additional allowance for other cars. So I think the bar is higher for him than we've had in the past, and quite frankly, I don't see that as an issue. I mean, having worked for a number of airports, it's sort of like rings of the tree. Whatever guidelines are in place at the time a new development's constructed, or the new developers is bound by. And in many cases, I can think of developments where they may not have got as good of a deal as the guys that developed before them. And so it's an unfortunate situation, and I think we still need to go back and address the parking issue with the existing hangars. But I think we can accommodate the new requirements with this development without creating anything that, well, I mean, obviously, he's still willing to go ahead, even though we've told him, you've got to meet this new law.
And he's very aware of that, that it is different for him.
Well, and that was an action we took last month, understanding that there is a parking problem, that he was,
Right.
we specified that part of his plans had to be provide parking over and above, so it was board action.
I just kind of think it's patently unfair that when we don't have a policy,
That's
we're
why I
trying to
asked.
enforce something we don't have.
Well, but at the same time, I think it's just good development procedure, and I mean, and in fact, there's certain things that, that I believe firmly in terms of development that, that I've already said to Laura, in the lease, for example, I don't want to do it that way. I've done it, I prefer this way, because, I found it's more enforceable, for example, or even on our termination language, I like the termination language to be a specific way, because I've run into it in the past. Same with development, for all the time I've been involved in development, since the 90s at airports, I've always said you can't build right up to the property line. Because if there's a fire, or if you need to do weed control or mow, you're on the other guy's property. And, and that's just not fair to the other guy, and not to mention most of our hangars don't have any gutters, so you're spilling your water right into his spot anyway. So it's things like that I think we need to enforce going forward, and I probably would have, when we got the drawing, said, this isn't good, I want to do something different anyway, even though we didn't have written guidelines.
But part of it is also that enforcement piece, that the current hangar owners going down this direction here, just because they're doing something doesn't mean that they should have been doing it, and we should have been enforcing it. They've never been allowed to be past the TOFA line and park their cars past there, but they've done it. They've never been allowed to park in between the hangars. They're not leasing that area, but they've done it. They've parked trailers up here. They've done things that they're not allowed to do per their lease, but they're doing it anyhow. So if we enforced it, which we should, it would be the same as his. We're asking him to park in here or past the TOFA. That's all we're asking them as well. So we're not changing that. The biggest thing is the square lot. And like I said, he's very aware that he got in at the wrong time.
Yeah.
Well, and I think out of fairness, it needs to be said too, that they were asked for their input. They weren't just dictated something that would be asked, how would you like to work this out? What might you suggest?
Well, it certainly.
It's not like there's anything being crammed down their throat.
And certainly Laura did talk to him, and he thought about coming out for this meeting, and of course, we're a public board, so if he wants to come out and address unfairness or anything like that, we would be more than willing to put him on the agenda. So, in the end, he realized that what we were asking was fairly insignificant in the scale of his project, and so he decided not to do that. But at one point, he was actually planning to fly up and address the board on the issue.
It just seems to me that we've got an issue that has been exacerbated over time, and we're trying to get it corrected, and maybe there's never a good time or a good way. I think this is frustration. That's the way kind of I view it. But anyway,
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve the lease.
I was going to ask for that. Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there discussion? All right, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Number 2, construction of passenger parking lot expansion. Rick?
Well, as we've discussed at the last couple of meetings, we're continuing to be low on parking. Our overnight inventory has grown 59% in the last 2 years, which is way out of scale even with our passenger growth, probably reflecting more Canadians who don't have anyone to drop them off using the airport. So as that growth has occurred, and we've gotten down to our last few stalls, in several cases, Rod and I have been out there trying to sandwich things between things that probably weren't meant to be there. But we've gotten down to the point where we just don't have the ability to accommodate parking during peak times. And by opening the employee lot up, we did get about 45 more stalls. As I said earlier, they've been completely absorbed. and we're still down to probably our last 2, maybe 3 dozen stalls during peak times. And keep in mind, we're still in a slow part of the year. As we get into June, July, we think we'll probably see even more constraints, and then next Christmas we expect we'll be right back in the position we were in this Christmas, even with the employee stalls, it will be out of parking again. So in order to try and facilitate some solution to that, we've been over the last couple of months talking to CH2M Hill, who is the airport's engineer right now, about a parking lot expansion that would occur out in the area between the entry road and the existing parking lot. They believe we can get about 130 stalls in that area over there. So we've had them go ahead and put together an engineer's estimate and begin preparing the design for a bid. We anticipate this project would bid probably in the next 2 to 3 weeks, I think is what they've said. It'd be a public bid, just like any other project, and we would build these stalls and be done with them, they think, by Memorial Day. So we'd actually have them in place for the summer busy period. We've got 2 options that they've laid out here in this exhibit. They think if we build the first 92 stalls, that budget works out to about $2,000 per stall and a total of about $177,000. If we go for the full build-out, which is another 36 stalls, the price goes, those 36 stalls are a little more expensive at about $2,400 per stall, worth about $85,000, leaving with this total budget about $262,000. The reason the phase 2 is more expensive is there's a grade break over there, and so we're going to actually drop a new storm inlet over there to pick up some of the drainage that goes that direction. In addition to that, that part of the lot where the 36 stalls will go is kind of the corner right behind the trees, and the current lights don't reflect over there well enough, so we're going to have to put in a new light pole in that area. So between the pole and the extra inlet, those stalls get a little more expensive per stall. What we would like to do, or what we would ask for, is a motion to allow us to execute a construction contract at not to exceed $262,000. Obviously, we don't know the bid results right now, but in about 2 weeks we'll have those. We want to go ahead and proceed with that project if we come in within the engineer's estimate as quickly as we can to have those stalls for summer. So that's what we're asking for, is a motion to proceed with an amount not to exceed $262,000. What we may do, depending on how, as we get through the end of March here and look at April, depending on how the pricing is, we'll probably bid 2 schedules. Depending on how the pricing is and what we really feel the demand is, we may decide to just do the first 100 stalls. If we get good prices, we might go ahead and do the other 40. I think we definitely have need for the 100, but it makes sense at the same time when we're paving right next to it and doing grading right next to it and pulling utility lines and everything else to get it done with one shot. I think we could do without the 40 for another couple of years, probably 2 to 3 more years. But at the demand levels now if something happens and Allegiant picks up their schedule even more than they've done, or Frontier comes full-time, we could definitely be in a position where we would need those 40 stalls, those additional stalls, prior to the next 2 to 3 years. But looking at the passenger numbers we're looking at now, I think the 100 would suffice for probably 2 more years. It's just a matter of whether we think it makes sense to do that in 2 phases and probably pay a little bit higher per stall.
Is it your intent on the bid to have an addendum 1 or addendum 2 for each component of this?
That's what we'd intend to do, is we'd bid it with 2 schedules. The Schedule 1, Schedule 2, and Schedule 2 would include the additional stalls.
Okay. Right.
John, or Mr. Chairman, wouldn't it be more expensive to put in the phase 1 and then come back in and put the phase 2? I mean, when you put it down as per stall, yeah, it's more expensive that way, but and I take those 2 costs and they exactly add up to each other, but wouldn't the second phase be more expensive because of startup costs and so on?
I think we'd probably pay a 15–20% premium to come back a second time. But at the same time, there's that time value of money. If we could get by 2–3 more years, it might make sense to wait. My prejudice would be to do them both if we get good pricing.
But wouldn't it be better then to have them do it 2 ways? One is to do phase 1, the other one is to do both phases instead of second phase separately?
Yeah, that's how we'll bid it. You'll be able to either do Schedule 1 and Schedule 2, so it'll be a 1+2. We'll get prices for both, but we may award just one, Schedule 1.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Humboldt?
I would move that we approve phases 1 and 2, but I would take the limit to not to exceed 265,000. I think you're too close to the limit right there, and you might as well give yourself just a slight bit of room.
Is there,
$28 is pretty.
is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Is there discussion?
If it goes over though, I fire my engineer, so.
There you go.
All right. So just so we're clear on the motion, we've approved it up to a max of 265,000 to include phase 1 and phase 2. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
It's the price of oil that's gonna affect me.
I know,
Yeah.
that's what just kills you. It's, fortunately, there's not a lot of paving work is what we're being told.
Brad, from your experience, is that, those prices look like they're in the range? Or can you tell?
It all depends on the site and how much work you have to do up front, but I don't think it's out of the ballpark. It's an opportune time to do it.
All right, Airport Authority Board comments. Commissioner Talcott.
I have no comments.
Commissioner Swenson.
I have no comments.
Commissioner Trujillo.
Which is the busiest airport in the world?
Atlanta, Hartsville.
Heathrow, England. 30 million per year
Really?
on TV this morning.
Oh, really?
Wow.
They got past Hartsville.
Wow, interesting.
Hartsville's
in the U.S.
30 million people.
Well, it used to be the busiest in the world. Yeah, because at one point it was O'Hare, and then Atlanta overtook O'Hare.
Heathrow in England.
Wow. Anything else?
Have it.
All right.
Just one quick thing that doesn't seem to fit anywhere in these schedules. I was contacted by some local people who needed to move a wheelchair-bound relative to Great Falls. And they complained bitterly about the temperature inside the elevator.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if there's anything we can do about keeping the doors open or something so it stays building temperature instead of outside.
Yeah, the one, this one's usually the coldest one. This one out here isn't really too bad though.
Yeah, that's the one they used.
Yeah.
That one does get cold, but I don't know what we can do with the venting.
You know, I don't know, we could look at something, you know, if we had to leave the doors open or something.
If the doors stayed open.
Oh, I wonder if that's a setting on a control that we could affect and just leave the doors open.
It could be, you might just have to program it in there.
I may be wrong, but I seem like I remember commercial buildings where the doors were open. Maybe that might be a new fire code too, we'll have to check on
Yeah,
that.
that would be
Oh,
long.
it's probably the TSA that doesn't like that.
Could you also do a thermal blanket wrap inside, like more in the winter and cold?
Yeah.
It's that box that it's in.
Yeah, it's
I know,
on the
but I mean,
exterior,
if you-
it's not insulated.
If you wrap the walls of the elevator with that, keep it a little bit of,
Yeah, that's a
No,
possibility.
because there's no air transfer between the heated part of the building and the.
There's a possibility we could put electric heaters
Yeah.
in there too, but wouldn't take very much to heat that small space.
But we don't know whether it's a fire code.
We'll have to check
Yeah, I
on
don't know,
that.
you may not be able to leave the doors open on them.
I don't think we want to do that. That's kind of an attractive nuisance.
That's quite true.
Little kids wanting to go in there and start pushing buttons.
They sure love that escalator.
Yeah, that'd take pressure off the
Yeah.
escalator.
Especially the child injuries over the elevator.
They like buttons.
Well, we can take a look at it and see, you know, what the possibilities are, you know, and I mean, I'm sure somebody else must have had this issue in the past. It's unfortunate because that thing's right on the exterior of the building.
Well, this one's usually the coldest, but we do put heat in the bottom of the shaft, but not that it helps the car any, but it does keep the equipment a little warmer, so it,
Actually functions.
yeah, so it functions more consistently.
That was it.
Is that a hydraulic elevator, Rod? or-
Yeah, they're both, the two newer ones are.
Yeah, that'd be a big problem if they got cold.
Commissioner
But they're
Humboldt?
on the outside of the wall
No
for the
comments.
building too,
Yeah.
and that concrete's not insulated.
Okay. Nothing? Commissioner Ross?
No comment.
I have no comments. Any public comment? Please.
Yeah, a couple of things. One is the low-cost air carrier initiative. Obviously, we've had a huge milestone, but as I'm moving around in the community, I'm sensing that the leakage problem is deeply entrenched in our community. So I think it would behoove us as an airport to continue to chisel away at that deeply entrenched thought process that I'm only going to get cheaper tickets if I travel to other cities in the state. I just bumped into it yesterday. And it can be just as simple as check us out again. Check us out before you go someplace else. But I think it's deeply entrenched, and that's our goal, was to turn that around. And we've got the tool here, now we need to continue to re-educate the public. And then the other thought I have is on the parking lot. I know it's a contract with Republic and so forth, but I'm thinking of simple economics. When you run out of something, the price kind of goes up a little bit to kind of throttle the demand back a little bit. Is that something that you know with it all? Or?
We get a lot of complaints relative to Helena already, and I think given the amount of leakage we have down to Helena, I really think it's not a good time to move the pricing. If Frontier was coming full time, I would say maybe that would be a good time to look. We've talked about this, and we've talked about it with Republic. We've talked about potentially moving the prices up, but I think if we can nail Frontier down and keep them full time so that we have a cost advantage that's permanent, I'd say that would be a good time to move into pricing. We do have that weekly product that's $35 a week. So we're $7 a day, but then we cap it at $35. And we've talked about eking that up $1 or $2 over the summer, just as a revenue management tool more than anything. But it's a fairly common complaint already how expensive our parking is. I don't know, Stephanie probably hears it more than anybody. I mean, how often would you say you get that in a month?
It really depends. I mean, you get half of them that say, oh, that's not bad, and then the other half is really, Helena doesn't charge anything,
They don't charge you anything?
It's pretty cheap.
They've got that volunteer system where you put an envelope on the windshield, and I've been told by people that fly out of Helena that they don't pay. I've actually had people say that it's, I go down there because, I don't pay for the parking, and I'm like, oh, well, that's not the intent of how that works. But do you know what their daily rate is, Rod? Is it $4 or $5?
Yeah, it's cheaper than we are, but I don't know exactly what it is.
We should know that because we have paid it at the FAA conference before, but I think it's $4 or $5 a day, and so they're not quite half, but I mean they're well below us. And for some reason, parking is one of those things that people think about. When they're planning a trip, right after the ticket price, so I'd say the Calgary folks probably would pay more gladly and not even blink an eye, but the folks from here that are going down to Helen and other airports, they do compare it. And that's another thing I just heard a few weeks ago. I actually had a Bozeman passenger here. Boy, was I happy. I can hardly believe it, But he was telling, and this is honestly the first time I've ever encountered anybody in this terminal that was from Bozeman coming here for a cheaper flight. And that's what he said, is I came for a cheaper fare. So we're starting to see the Frontier tickets leaking out, but that's what he said too, is I saved quite a bit on parking.
And then is Billings considering building a parking structure?
I hadn't heard that. And they are pretty sandwiched up against the road there.
Right. I just didn't know if that's parking structure, if they cross that struggle, that drive,
Well, I
ticket price way up.
I was going to say that would be dandy. My hometown, Dayton, just built one, and Brad probably knows better than any of us, but for a parking stall in a garage, it's hard to get under $18,000, and when you back the math up, you end up with $12 a day is about the bare minimum floor price you can charge if you have a parking garage and still recover. Like for us, that's a profit center. I mean, most of that, $2,000 stall to build a new stall, you make that back in 2 or 3 years. But you get into a garage and it can be a 10, 20-year recovery cycle.
Again, I was connecting that back to the leakage issue.
That'd be
The
great.
cost of going to a different airport would include parking.
I'll let the notes show I support a garage in Billings.
But that's really a good comment, Dwight. I think I'm glad you made that, because I think that's something that we need to stay in tune on, because I think you're right. People just get it in their mindset, and until they really take a hard look And we really need to invite them to do that, take the hard look, because I think the numbers are gonna bear themselves out very well.
We're working with the Tribune, we're hoping to get a price, we're hoping to get it yesterday, but it hasn't come yet, on some ads for the next 6 to 8 weeks. That'd be a good time to make that message, and then we're going to support that with some news stories throughout.
Yeah, I was also thinking of, like the chamber emailers to come out, so
Right.
stuff that wouldn't cost you any money.
Right. Very good. Any other public comment? All right, seeing none, this meeting is adjourned, and I would like to reconvene us at 1:55 to 2 for the work session. So thank you, everyone, for being here.
The focus of our ads, we're actually going to publish real fares, because I think that gets people's attention better than anything. During the St. Patty's Day Parade,